This story, as incredible as it might sound, is a true account of my life. Every word of it etched into my memory with the acid of betrayal and the fire of retribution. The day Vesper Kane fired me, she didn't just strip away my livelihood. She ripped out 4 decades of my soul and tossed it into corporate shredder, believing I was nothing more than an obsolete component. But what she failed to understand, what all of them failed to understand, was that you don't discard a man like Theron Vance and expect him to simply fade into the quiet oblivion of old age. That day, something within me, something dormant for too long, finally awoke. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far a story flows. My name is Theron Vance, and at 71 years old, I was, by all accounts, a dinosaur in the sleek, glass and steel jungle of Ethelgard dynamics. Yet, for 42 years, I had been their dinosaur. I'd seen the company grow from a scrappy data management startup operating out of a cramped office above a Philadelphia deli to a global titan with a market cap that dwarfed small nations. My fingerprints were on their earliest server architecture. My strategic insights had guided them through the dot-com bust, and my steady hand had navigated countless crises. I was Director of Enterprise Solutions, a title that sounded grand but mostly meant I knew where every digital skeleton was buried, understood the arcane logic behind systems nobody else bothered to learn, and could still outthink most of the freshly minted MBAs who strode to the gleaming hallways with an air of unearned superiority. My life was a rhythm, a comfortable, predictable cadence set by the rising sun and the ticking clock of Ethelgard. Each morning, before the city truly woke, I'd be up. The aroma of strong coffee would fill my modest but impeccably kept twin home in Bryn Mawr, a quiet suburb just west of Philadelphia. While the coffee brewed, I'd walk Scout, my faithful, scruffy terrier mix, around the tree-lined streets, the crisp morning air familiar balm. Scout, a rescue, was my constant companion since my Lyra past 5 years ago. He was a silent confidant, his eager tail wags and soft nudges a daily reminder of unconditional affection. After Scout's walk and a quick breakfast of oatmeal and fruit, I donned one of my well-tailored, albeit slightly dated, suits, not my favorite silk tie, a gift from Lyra, and make the familiar commute into the city. The Scepter Regional Rail was my mobile office. I'd read industry reports, review project proposals, and sometimes just watch the city wake up around me, the skyline growing ever taller, ever more imposing. There was a comfort in this routine, a sense of purpose that had defined me for most of my adult life. Ethelgard wasn't just a job. It was my legacy, my contribution to a world increasingly reliant on the very data systems I helped build and maintain. My office at Ethelgard on the 32nd floor of the shimmering tower on Market Street was a testament to both my longevity and my resistance to modern corporate aesthetics. While younger colleagues embraced minimalist desks and standing workstations, mine was a sanctuary of organized chaos. Stacks of physical reports mingled with schematics. A framed photo of Lyra and me on our honeymoon sat next to a commendation plaque from 1998, and my old ergonomic keyboard, worn smooth from years of use, felt like an extension of my own hands. I wasn't opposed to new technology. I just knew what worked, and sometimes the tried and true was simply more efficient. Lately, though, the comfort had been slowly eroding. A new wind was blowing through Ethelgard, not a refreshing breeze, but a cold, sterile draft. It started subtly with a new CEO, a disruptor named Alistair Finch, who spoke in buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and optimizing human capital. Old guard like me, Alistair implied, were legacy systems that needed to be modernized or decommissioned. Then came the restructuring. Departments were merged, roles were redefined, and the familiar faces in cubicles around me began to disappear, replaced by fresh-faced, hungry individuals who looked at my gray hair and sensible shoes with a mixture of polite deference and barely concealed pity. The architect of this modernization was Vesper Kane. She joined Ethelgard barely 2 years ago, a meteoric rise from a rival firm. Young, impeccably dressed, with eyes that held the cold, calculating glint of shark, Vesper was everything I wasn't. She moved with predatory grace, her voice a low, confident purr that could, without warning, sharpened into a razor's edge. She was a new head of global operations, a role that gave her unprecedented power, and she wielded it with ruthless efficiency. I'd seen her dismantle entire teams with dismissive wave of her hand. Her explanations always couched in the language of progress and efficiency, but the underlying message was clear. If you weren't an asset to her vision, you were a liability. I'd tried to adapt. Truly, I'd attended the mandatory digital transformation workshops, sat through endless presentations on AI integration, and even attempted to navigate the labyrinthine new internal communication platforms. But my value, I believed, lay in my institutional knowledge, my ability to connect disparate systems, to understand the foundational logic that underpinned Ethelgard's vast digital empire. I was the one who could fix problems nobody else could even diagnose, the one who remembered why a particular piece of code was written a certain way 20 years ago and how it impacted the system today. I was the bedrock, not the glitter. The summons came on a Tuesday. A terse email from Vesper Kane's assistant. Ms. Kane requests your presence in her office at 10 a.m. today. Please confirm. No agenda, no pleasantries. Just a command. My stomach, usually placid, gave a nervous lurch. I'd seen this email before, sent to others. It was a digital equivalent of a black spot. I confirmed, of course, and spent the next hour trying to focus on a critical vulnerability report. But my mind kept drifting. What could it be? A new project? A demotion? I tried to rationalize, to tell myself that my experience was invaluable, that they couldn't possibly do without me. But a chill, born of corporate reality, snaked its way down my spine. At precisely 10 a.m., I stood before Vesper Kane's office door. It was made of frosted glass, emblazoned with a minimalist Ethelgard logo. I knocked once, softly. "Come in, Theron." Her voice, devoid of warmth, cut through the door. Her office was the antithesis of mine. Sprawling, minimalist, dominated by a massive glass desk that seemed to float in the center of the room. The walls were stark white, adorned with abstract art. The only personal touch was a sleek, silver sculpture that looked like intertwined razor blades. Vesper sat behind her desk, impeccably dressed in a charcoal power suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant ponytail. Her gaze, as I entered, was unwavering, like a predator assessing its prey. Across from her, already seated, was Alara Vance. No relation, but another new face, head of human resources, whose perpetual smile never quite reached her eyes. She looked uncomfortable, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Theron, thank you for coming," Vesper said, her tone utterly neutral. She gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Please sit." I sat, my back ramrod straight, my heart thumping a little faster than usual. The air in the room felt thin, charged with unspoken words. "Theron," Vesper began, her eyes still locked on mine, "Ethelgard Dynamics is undergoing a profound transformation. We are moving into an era of unprecedented agility, innovation, and, frankly, speed. Our vision for the future requires a team that is not only proficient but also deeply aligned with our new strategic direction." I nodded, maintaining a stoic expression. I knew where this was going. I had seen it play out countless times. "Your contributions to Ethelgard over the past 4 decades are, of course, well documented and appreciated," she continued, a faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip betraying her true sentiment. "You've been a foundational pillar of this organization." Alara offered a weak, sympathetic smile, which I ignored. "However," Vesper pressed on, her voice hardening slightly, "the demands of modern enterprise solutions have evolved. The landscape is shifting at an exponential rate. We need individuals who are not just adapting to change, but actively driving it. We need a fresh perspective, a more dynamic approach to leadership within your department." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. "After careful consideration and in light of our ongoing restructuring initiatives, we've made the difficult decision to reorganize the Director of Enterprise Solutions role. Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated." The words hit me not with a bang, but with a dull, sickening thud. Eliminated. Not redundant, not reorganized, but eliminated. As if I never existed. My life's work, my identity, reduced to an obsolete data point. I felt a flush creep up my neck, but I held her gaze. Eliminated, I managed, my voice a little rougher than I intended. Vesper, I've been with this company since its inception. I know these systems better than anyone alive. I've trained half the people in this building. My institutional knowledge alone is invaluable. She leaned forward slightly, her expression unyielding. And we recognize that, Theron, but institutional knowledge, while valuable, can also at times become a constraint. We need to move unburdened by past methodologies, free to innovate without the weight of legacy systems dictating our future. We're looking for disruptive innovation, not incremental improvements. Disruptive innovation? I scoffed, a rare flash of anger escaping my carefully maintained composure. You're talking about gutting the very foundations that made this company what it is. You're talking about casting aside the people who built it, the people who sacrificed for it, for some vague, buzzword-laden vision of the future. Vesper's eyes narrowed, a cold fire igniting within them. Theron, I understand this is difficult. Change often is. But this is not a negotiation. This is a strategic decision for the betterment of the company. Ethelgard dynamics must always look forward, not backward. Ilara, sensing the tension, finally spoke, her voice timid. Mr. Vance, we have prepared a severance package for you. It's quite generous, reflecting your many years of service. It includes 6 months' salary, continued health benefits for a year, and outplacement services if you wish. 6 months' salary. A paltry sum for 42 years of my life. A calculated insult. They were buying me off, hoping I'd just disappear quietly into my golden years. A forgotten relic. Outplacement services? I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. At 71, Ilara, what placement do you think I'm looking for? A greeter at a superstore? A consultant for a company that values loyalty and experience. 2 things this new Ethelgard clearly despises. Vesper cut in, her voice now edged with impatience. Theron, we appreciate your passion, but this decision is final. Your access to company systems will be terminated at the end of the day. Please ensure all personal effects are removed by 5 p.m. Your company laptop and phone will be collected from your desk. The finality of her words was a physical blow. Terminated, collected, dismissed, like a piece of faulty equipment. My office, my sanctuary, will be picked clean by strangers. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling strangely heavy. I looked from Vesper's cold, triumphant gaze to Ilara's apologetic, yet resolute stare. The anger, the disbelief, the profound sense of betrayal began to curdle into something darker, something colder. You know, I said, my voice low, steady. I've seen a lot of people come and go from Ethelgard Vesper. Some left gracefully, some were pushed, but never, in all my decades here, have I seen such a casual disregard for human value, for history, for the very foundations of what makes a company more than just a balance sheet. Vesper simply looked at me, unmoved. The market values innovation, Theron, not sentimentality. Sentimentality? I scoffed. Call it what you will. But remember this, Vesper. The very systems you now control, the ones you think you can simply modernize, are built on layers of intricate code, on decades of knowledge. When you strip away the people who understand those layers, you don't just innovate. You create vulnerabilities. You create blind spots. And sometimes, I lean forward slightly, my voice dropping to a near whisper, those blind spots can swallow an entire empire. I turned without waiting for a reply, the heavy silence of the office pressing in on me. As I walked out, I heard Vesper's voice, perfectly calm, speaking to Ilara. Next on the agenda, Ilara, we need to finalize the Q3 projected synergy report. The familiar walk back to my office felt like a death march. Every face I passed, every cubicle, every familiar hum of servers seemed to mock me. 42 years. Gone. Just like that. I sat at my desk, looking at the framed photo of Lyra. Her smiling face seemed to ask, what now, Theron? Scout, waiting patiently at home, was the only thing that felt real that still needed me. I packed my few personal items: Lyra's photo, the old commendation plaque, a worn copy of Sun Tzu's The Art of War that had always sat on my shelf. As I cleared my desk, I saw the blinking light on my old company phone. A voicemail from Rory, a junior engineer I'd mentored for years, now working in a different department. "Mr. Vance." His voice sounded nervous. "I heard some things. I just wanted to say, whatever's happening, you're the best. You taught me everything." A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path down my cheek. Rory. He got it. He understood. But Vesper Kane, Alistair Finch, they didn't. They never would. I walked out of Ethel Gar Dynamics for the last time at 4:58 p.m., the late afternoon sun casting long, accusatory shadows across the street. The security guard, a young man I'd never seen before, took my company badge with a perfunctory nod. No handshake. No, "Thank you for your service." Just another nameless face erased from the corporate ledger. The train ride home was a blur of silent rage and profound grief. By the time I unlocked the front door to my quiet house, the day's events had solidified into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. Scout greeted me with frantic tail wags and happy yips, his unbridled joy a stark contrast to the storm raging within me. I knelt and buried my face in his fur, feeling the tremor of my own silent sobs. Later that evening, after Scout had curled up at the foot of my bed, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a searing anger. They didn't just fire me, they dismissed my entire life. They tried to erase me. The image of Vesper Kane's cold, calculating eyes, her dismissive tone, played on a loop in my mind. But then a new thought began to surface, slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. It wasn't just about me. It was about all the others, the loyal employees discarded, the corporate memory wiped clean for the sake of disruptive innovation, and the vulnerabilities, the blind spots I had spoken of. I knew Ethelgard better than anyone. I knew its strengths, its weaknesses, its deepest, darkest secrets. Secrets they thought were safely buried beneath layers of new management and glossy presentations. They wanted to play a new game. Fine, but they had forgotten one crucial rule. You never, ever underestimate a man who has nothing left to lose. And as the first sliver of dawn painted the sky, a chilling certainty settled over me. Vesper Kane had shattered my life. Yes, but in doing so, she had unwittingly forged a weapon. And I, Theron Vance, was about to wield it. The silence of my Bryn Mawr home, once a soothing balm, now felt like a suffocating shroud. Scout, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the shift in my world. He'd nudged my hand with his wet nose, his big, soulful eyes searching mine as if asking, "Why aren't we going to the office today, Theron? How do you explain the systemic dismantling of your very identity to a dog?" The first few days were a blur of numb disbelief. I walked Scout, made coffee, stared at the television without seeing it. My routine, once accompanying anchor, now felt like a hollow parody. My hands, accustomed to the familiar click of a keyboard and the reassuring weight of reports, felt strangely useless. The severance package arrived in my email, a cold, impersonal document attached to a generic HR message. I didn't even open it. The money was an insult, a paltry attempt to erase 42 years of dedication with a few zeros. It wasn't about the money. It was about respect, about purpose, about the simple human decency they had so casually discarded. The anger, initially a searing inferno, began to cool, morphing into a hard, crystalline resolve. I remembered Vesper's dismissive gaze, her utter certainty that she was right, that I was an anachronism, asterisk the market values innovation, therein, not sentimentality. Asterisk her words echoed in my mind, each syllable a chisel chipping away at my grief, revealing the steel beneath. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet dedication for weakness, my experience for obsolescence. They thought they had buried me. But what they had done was sow a seed of something far more dangerous than an angry old man. They had created a ghost, unbound by corporate loyalty, armed with unparalleled institutional knowledge, and with nothing left to lose. I started small. I pulled out my old, personal laptop, a reliable but dated machine I use mostly for emails and managing my finances. It felt alien after years of Ethelgard's high-end corporate hardware. The first thing I did was wipe it clean, a symbolic act of severing my digital ties to my past and preparing for a new, uncharted future. Then I installed a fresh operating system, layered with encryption, and began to research. I wasn't looking for a new job. I was looking for a new battlefield. My mind, once a vast library of Ethelgard's internal systems, now became a forensic lab. I started replaying conversations, recalling old project files, cross-referencing names and dates. I remembered specific bugs, obscure patches, the quirks and redundancies that only decades of intimate interaction could reveal. Ethelgard wasn't a monolithic, perfectly engineered machine. It was a sprawling organic entity, built over decades by countless hands, with layers upon layers of legacy code interacting with cutting-edge solutions, often in ways that defied intuitive logic. I knew those fault lines. I knew where the tectonic plates of their data infrastructure met and where the pressure was building. Vesper Kane, with her sleek, razor-blade sculpture and her talk of disruptive innovation, believed she could simply streamline this intricate ecosystem. She was gutting core teams, pushing through rapid deployments, and, I suspected, bypassing critical testing protocols in her relentless pursuit of speed and efficiency. Her ambition, I realized, was not just a modernized Ethelgard, but to remake in her own image, a monument to her ruthless vision, regardless of the cost. My first tangible step was to establish a secure, anonymous presence. I didn't want Ethelgard or anyone tracing my activities. I drove out to a nondescript electronics store in King of Prussia, far from my usual haunts. I purchased a burner phone and a prepaid data plan, paying in cash. I bought a new mid-range laptop, again with cash, and insisted on a fresh, sealed box. The young clerk, barely out of high school, eyed my gray hair with a mixture of confusion and mild curiosity. He probably thought I was setting up a new email account for my grandchildren. He had no idea I was laying the groundwork for digital warfare. Back home, I stripped the new laptop down, replacing its factory-installed operating system with a hardened, open-source distribution renowned for its privacy features. I configured a series of VPNs and proxy chains, creating a digital labyrinth to obscure my true location. It was slow work, meticulous, demanding, but as I dove into the technical details, a familiar spark ignited within me. This was what I did. This was my expertise. I wasn't just an old man anymore. I was a digital architect, building a new kind of structure, one designed not for growth, but for precise, surgical deconstruction. I started monitoring Ethelgard's public presence. News releases, investor calls, industry analyses. Vesper Kane's name was everywhere. She was lauded as a visionary, a force of nature propelling Ethelgard into a new era. Alastair Finch, the CEO, often stood beside her, his face beaming with corporate pride. They spoke of unprecedented growth, of bold acquisitions, of a revolutionary new data management platform called Project Chimera. Chimera, the name itself was a warning. A mythical beast, part lion, part goat, part serpent. A monstrous hybrid. I remembered a hushed conversation I'd overheard weeks before my firing about an aggressive integration strategy for a newly acquired, highly experimental AI firm. At the time, I dismissed it as typical corporate hype. Now it clicked into place. Vesper was pushing for a rapid, perhaps reckless, integration of this new tech into Ethelgard's core infrastructure. My gut clenched. This wasn't just about disruptive innovation. It was about unchecked ambition. I began to delve deeper into the public records of the acquired company, Synapse Innovations. They specialize in predictive analytics and algorithmic trading, their technology promising hyper-optimized investment strategies. Their founders were brilliant, but young, unseasoned, the kind of minds Vesper Kane would easily charm and then exploit. Synapse's own internal systems, though cutting edge, were relatively small-scale, designed for niche applications. Integrating them into Ethelgard's colossal, globally distributed enterprise architecture, especially at the speed Vesper was demanding, was an act of profound hubris. It was like trying to graft a delicate orchid onto an ancient redwood, expecting it to thrive without root shock. My institutional knowledge told me exactly where the weaknesses would lie. Ethelgard's legacy financial systems, for example, were built on decades-old COBOL, painstakingly maintained and patched. Its data warehousing solutions were a complex tapestry of SQL and NoSQL databases, some dating back to the late 90s. The integration points between these foundational layers and Synapse's agile, AI-driven platforms would be rife with potential vulnerabilities. Data schema mismatches, security protocol conflicts, unforeseen latency issues. These were the blind spots I had warned Vesper about. These were the cracks in the foundation she was ignoring. I spent hours in my study, a room usually reserved for reading and quiet contemplation, now transformed into my command center. Maps of Ethelgard's network topology, drawn from memory, began to adorn a whiteboard, arrows indicating data flow, circles marking critical nodes, question marks highlighting potential points of failure. Scout, curled in his dog bed at my feet, would occasionally sigh, his rhythmic breathing the only sound breaking the intense quiet. I also started reaching out, subtly, to a few former colleagues. Not directly, not with my real name. I use anonymous encrypted messaging apps, posing as an industry analyst, asking general questions about Ethelgard's new initiatives, about the mood in the company. The responses, though guarded, painted a consistent picture. Morale was low. Teams were stretched thin. Project Chimera was the talk of the company, universally acknowledged as Vesper Kane's pet project, pushed through with aggressive deadlines and little tolerance for dissent. Whispers of unexpected glitches and system instability were beginning to surface, always quickly suppressed. One evening, a message came back from an old contact, a network engineer named Kalen, whom I had mentored for years. Kalen was a meticulous, cautious man, deeply loyal to the technical integrity of the systems. He rarely spoke ill of anyone, but his message was unsettling. Asterisk, heard you were gone, Theron. Sorry to hear. Things are fast here now. Very fast. Project Chimera is ambitious. They're pushing hard. Too hard, some of us think. Cutting corners on testing. Security audits are being expedited. Asterisk, expedited. That single word sent a chill down my spine. In the world of enterprise security, expedited was a euphemism for ignored. Vesper Kane, in her relentless drive for speed, was sacrificing Ethelgard's very stability, potentially its very integrity. She wasn't just making a strategic error. She was creating a systemic catastrophe waiting to happen. And she was doing it all under the guise of progress, with Alistair Finch's eager endorsement. My resolve hardened further. This wasn't just about my personal revenge anymore. This was about Ethelgard. The company I had built, the legacy I had poured my life into, was being jeopardized by a pair of self-serving executives drunk on power and buzzwords. I had to expose them. I had to show them the real cost of their disruptive innovation. But how? I was an outsider now, my access revoked, my name tainted. Any direct action would be dismissed as the bitter ravings of a disgruntled former employee. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable evidence of their recklessness. Something that would expose Project Chimera for the dangerous hybrid it truly was. I knew Ethelgard's external defenses were formidable. Their firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and security teams were top tier. But I also knew their internal architecture. I knew the overlooked diagnostic ports, the obscure API endpoints, the administrative backdoors meant for emergency access that, once configured, were rarely re-audited. I knew the logic of their user authentication systems, the patterns of their logging servers. I had designed many of them. My mind drifted to a specific, almost forgotten feature I had implemented decades ago, a ghost logging system. It was designed for deep-level diagnostics, a failsafe that mirrored critical system events to an encrypted, off-site server. It was meant to be a last resort, a way to recover forensic data, even if the main logs were compromised. It required a specific, complex key, a sequence of alphanumeric characters known only to a handful of us old-timers, and a unique, custom-built decryption tool. I had created the tool myself, a small, elegant piece of software I affectionately called Lyra's Key, after my late wife, whose meticulous nature had always inspired my own attention to detail. I remembered the server's physical location, a small, unassuming data center in rural Pennsylvania, miles from a main Philadelphia campus, ostensibly for disaster recovery. It was a relic, rarely accessed, probably forgotten by the new guard. If Project Chimera was indeed cutting corners, if Vesper was pushing changes through without adequate logging or testing, then the Ghost logging system might just hold the unvarnished truth. It would contain the raw, unadulterated data of every system interaction, every error message, every bypass security alert, the kind of data that, if exposed, could bring down empires. The challenge wasn't just accessing it, it was decoding it. Lyra's key was written in a programming language so archaic, so specialized, that few modern engineers would even recognize it. It was a digital lock, and I held the only key. I spent the next few weeks immersed in the past, dusting off old programming manuals, refamiliarizing myself with the esoteric syntax of that forgotten language. My hands, once clumsy on the unfamiliar keyboard, now flew across the keys with renewed purpose. It was like learning to play a beloved, complex piece of music again after a long hiatus. The rhythm came back to me. The logic flowed. I meticulously rebuilt Lyra's key on my secure laptop, line by painstaking line. It was a testament to my past self, a lifeline thrown across decades. As the final lines of code compiled, a sense of exhilaration, both grim and potent, coursed through me. I was ready. I had my tool. Now, I needed to find a way in, a way to connect to that forgotten server, retrieve the encrypted logs, and let Lyra's key unlock the truth. It wouldn't be easy. A direct, overt hack was out of question. I needed subtlety, precision, and a deep understanding of Ethelgard's network blind spots. I needed to become a ghost in their machine. My focus narrowed to one particular vulnerability, an old, unpatched VPN gateway in a remote office in Reading, Pennsylvania. It was a legacy connection, maintained primarily for a handful of long-term employees who preferred working from that satellite location. I had personally overseen its initial setup, and I knew its quirks, its forgotten administrative accounts, its default configurations that were never properly hardened after its initial deployment due to bureaucratic oversight. It was a tiny, almost invisible crack in Ethelgard's formidable digital fortress, a crack that Vesper Kane's aggressive modernization had almost certainly overlooked. I began to craft my approach, a meticulous, multi-stage infiltration designed to leave no trace. It would require perfect timing, a deep understanding of network traffic patterns, and the ability to disappear as quickly as I appeared. One chilly evening, as the autumn leaves rustled outside my window, I sat at my desk, the glow of my screen reflecting in my eyes. Scout, sensing my intensity, was unusually still, his head resting on my knee. On my screen, a complex network diagram of Ethelgard's infrastructure pulsed, the reading gateway highlighted in red. The ghost logging server, a faint green, lay just beyond it, waiting. I ran a final check of my tools. The custom-built decryption key, the anonymous network pathway, the carefully crafted scripts. Everything was in place. My heart thumped not with fear, but with a cold, electrifying anticipation. I was no longer Theron Vance, the discarded director of Enterprise Solutions. I was the architect of shadows, a silent, unseen force moving through the digital ether. Vesper Kane had opened a Pandora's box, and I was about to unleash its contents. With a deep breath, I initiated the first command. A series of encrypted packets began their silent journey across the internet, probing the distant reading gateway. The first phase of my counteroffensive had begun. I watched the console, lines of code scrolling past, each one a step closer to the truth. Then a flicker, a small, unexpected error message, a connection timeout, but not a denial. Something was different. The gateway, which should have been a relatively straightforward entry point, was behaving erratically. My brow furrowed. Had they patched it? Unlikely, given Vesper's focus on bigger picture changes. Or was it something else? A new layer of security? Or perhaps an internal struggle? I ran a deeper diagnostic, pushing past the initial timeout. The response, when it finally came, was cryptic, fragmented. It wasn't a clean denial, but a garbled stream of data, hinting at a network under stress. And then, buried within the noise, a string of characters that made my blood run cold. It was an access signature, one I immediately recognized. An old, forgotten protocol for emergency network isolation. Someone else was already inside. Or, more unsettlingly, someone had been inside and was trying to cover their tracks. But who? And why would they be using such an archaic method? My revenge, I realized with sudden jolt, might be far more complicated and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The game was no longer just between Vesper Kane and me. There was another player in the shadows, and they were already moving, and they were likely playing for even higher stakes. The cryptic string of characters, the emergency network isolation signature, wasn't just a flicker on my screen. It was a jolt to my entire being. It was an ancient protocol, a relic from the early days of Ethelgard, designed for extreme network events, a catastrophic breach, a system-wide meltdown. It wasn't something a typical corporate hacker, or even Vesper Kane's new guard, would know or implement. This was the digital equivalent of finding a forgotten Mayan glyph in a modern skyscraper. Someone with deep, almost archaeological knowledge of Ethelgard's infrastructure was already inside. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my planned infiltration sequence abandoned. This wasn't just a hurdle. It was a seismic shift in the battlefield. My initial anger, once focused solely on Vesper and Alistair, now twisted into a cold, intellectual curiosity. Who else knew these secrets? Who else remembered the forgotten pathways, the emergency bypasses, the very specific, almost proprietary methods of isolating critical network segments? I pulled back from the reading gateway, my digital probes retreating like cautious scouts. Direct engagement was out of the question until I understood the new player. My strategy pivoted from infiltration to observation. I needed to become a ghost among ghosts. My home office, once a quiet sanctuary, now pulsed with a new kind of energy. I began to construct a different kind of map, one not just of Ethelgard's network, but of its digital shadows. I leveraged my knowledge of overlooked diagnostic subnets, forgotten VPN tunnels, to decommission satellite offices and obscure data retention servers. These were the neglected corners of Ethelgard's sprawling empire, places where the new guard, focused on their shiny Project Amera, wouldn't bother to look. These were my listening posts. Days bled into nights. Scout, a silent, furry anchor, would rest his head on my knee, his soft snores a counterpoint to the relentless click of my keyboard. I ran passive scans, set up honeypots on forgotten IPs, and configured my new laptop to sift through the ambient network noise, searching for anomalies. It was painstaking work, like sifting sand for gold dust, but the familiar rhythm of logical deduction of problem-solving began to reawaken parts of my mind I thought had atrophied. Then a whisper, a faint, almost imperceptible signature, a specific, unusual packet routing, a header manipulation that was less a hack and more a fingerprint. It was antiquated, inefficient by modern standards, but unique. And I knew it. My blood ran cold. The signature belonged to Jorik Thorn. Jorik Thorn. The name alone conjured a storm of memories. Jorik was a contemporary of mine, a brilliant, eccentric network architect who had worked at Ethelgard in its infancy. He was a savant with code, a master of obscure protocols, but also a man of volatile temperament and questionable ethics. He had been quietly ushered out of the company nearly 20 years ago under a thick shroud of rumor, whispers of data manipulation and corporate espionage. I had always suspected he was involved in something far more nefarious than the undisclosed personal reasons cited in his official termination notice. The idea that he was back, operating within Ethelgard's network, using his old, distinctive methods, was deeply unsettling. Why was Jorik here? Was he working for Vesper? Was he a mercenary hired to clean up the impending mess of Project Chimera? Or was he a rogue agent, pursuing his own agenda? I shifted my surveillance to focus on Jorik's signature. His activity was subtle, almost imperceptible to standard intrusion detection systems, but glaringly obvious to me. He wasn't trying to steal data wholesale. He was surgical. He was targeting specific datasets, metadata, and, Most damningly, log files. He was systematically deleting, modifying, and obfuscating records, particularly those related to Project Chimera's recent deployments, system errors, and data integrity reports. Jorg wasn't attacking Ethelgard. He was sanitizing it. He was burying evidence. While Jorg worked in the shadows, Vesper Kane and Alistair Finch continued their public charade. News releases trumpeted Ethelgard's unprecedented growth and the revolutionary success of Project Chimera. Industry analysts, mesmerized by Vesper's confident pronouncements and Ethelgard's soaring stock price, lauded her as a genius. But beneath the glossy veneer, the cracks were widening. Kalen, my old contact, sent another encrypted message, his tone more urgent this time. Asterisk Theron, they're pushing out another major Chimera update next week. Expedited testing again. Internal reports are showing critical data mismatches and some significant financial discrepancies in test environments. They're being suppressed. Management is furious about the negative chatter. Asterisk. Then came the public noise. A small but influential financial firm, Peregrine Capital, a longtime Ethelgard client, issued a discreet press release citing unforeseen systemic incompatibilities with their data feeds from Ethelgard, leading to minor transactional disruptions. Minor transactional disruptions was corporate speak for financial hemorrhage. Ethelgard stock dipped slightly, but Vesper and Alistair quickly dismissed as an isolated incident due to Peregrine's unique legacy systems. Lies. I knew the truth. Peregrine's systems were robust, their integration with Ethelgard meticulously managed for decades. This wasn't their fault. It was Chimera's. Jorg's frenetic activity intensified around the time of the Peregrine Capital incident. He was a digital janitor, frantically sweeping problems under the rug. He was targeting the very logs that would expose Vesper Kane and Alistair Finch. My ghost logging system, the one Lyra's key was meant to unlock, contained the raw, unvarnished truth. If Jorg reached it first, if he tampered with those logs, my entire mission would be compromised. My chance for justice, for exposing their recklessness, would vanish. A new, dangerous dilemma materialized. Jorg was a direct threat to my objective, but was he an enemy or a desperate accomplice? Was he protecting Vesper, or was he coerced? His methods, so old school, suggested a certain independence, or at least a resistance to modern corporate tools. Yet his actions served Vesper's agenda perfectly. I needed to get to those ghost logs. And I needed to do it before Jorg could sanitize them. My window of opportunity was rapidly closing, threatened by a ghost from Ethelgard's past and the relentless march of Vesper's progress. My plan had to change again. I couldn't simply bypass Jorg. I needed to intercept him, or at least leverage his presence. I knew Jorg's style. He was brilliant, but also predictable in his unpredictability. He favored specific, complex patterns for his obfuscation, almost like a signature. He would create noise to hide his true actions, but that noise itself, to a trained ear, could become a pattern. I began to craft a counter-intrusion, a digital snare designed to exploit Jorg's very methods. I would use Ethelgard's own network against both him and Vesper. I started to pinpoint specific, forgotten administrative pathways within Ethelgard's internal network, the kind that Jorg, in his focus on the more obvious data repositories, might overlook. These were the digital equivalent of secret passages, known only to a handful of us old-timers. My target, a small, almost forgotten diagnostics server cluster deep within Ethelgard's internal network, designed to mirror critical traffic from the core financial systems. It was a perfect choke point, a place where I could observe Jorg's real-time activity and potentially even intercept his data manipulation commands. More importantly, it was a pathway that led, albeit indirectly, to the rural Pennsylvania data center housing my ghost logging system. The night I initiated my new plan was a cold, starless one. The only light in my study came from the glowing screens. Scout, sensing the heightened tension, remained vigilant by my side, his ears perked. My fingers danced across the keyboard, executing a meticulously choreographed sequence of commands. I entered Ethelgard's network through a decommissioned VPN gateway in upstate New York, an old connection I'd left dormant for years. From there, I moved laterally, a shadow flitting through forgotten subnets, bypassing modern firewalls that were too busy looking for external threats to notice the internal anomaly. I reached the diagnostic server cluster. It was a digital ghost town, humming with the quiet hum of forgotten purpose. As I established my presence, I began to see it. Jorg Thorn's signature, a faint, erratic pulse of data moving through the very systems I was trying to access. He was here. He was active, and his activities were more extensive than I had initially believed. He wasn't just sanitizing logs. He was systematically altering transactional data within the company's internal ledger systems, not just covering tracks, but actively rewriting history. This wasn't just about protecting Vesper Kane from embarrassment. It was about concealing a massive, ongoing financial fraud. Peregrine Capital's minor transactional disruptions were just the tip of a colossal iceberg. And then I saw it, buried deep within Jorg's active processes, a command sequence, still running, still incomplete. It wasn't just erasing old data. It was orchestrating a massive, automated transfer of funds, not from Ethelgard, but through Ethelgard to a series of offshore accounts. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a brazen multi-million-dollar heist, using Ethelgard's Project Chimera as the perfect smokescreen. And the recipient accounts, they were registered as shell corporations, but the underlying beneficial owner data, briefly exposed by a glitch in Jorg's own sloppy code, pointed to a name that made my breath catch in my throat. It wasn't Vesper Kane. It wasn't Alistair Finch. It was a much larger, more powerful figure, a name that could shake the very foundations of the global financial market. Before I could react, before I could fully comprehend the scope of what I was witnessing, a new alert flashed on my screen. A single, short, terrifying line of code. Connection _ detected. Foreign _ presence _ initiating _ traceback. Jorg Thorn had detected me. He knew I was there, and he was coming for me. My digital ghost had been seen, and now the hunter had become the hunted. I was no longer merely observing. I was now a direct target in a game far deadlier than I had ever imagined, a game where the stakes were not just Ethelgard's reputation, but potentially my very life. Connection _ detected. Foreign _ presence _ initiating _ traceback. The words glared at me from the screen, stark and accusatory. Jorg Thorn knew. He wasn't just a ghost in the machine. He was a living, breathing predator, and he had detected my presence. My heart hammered, not from fear, but from the raw, electric surge of adrenaline. The game had just escalated from a meticulous investigation to a desperate, high-stakes duel. Jorg was initiating a traceback. He was trying to pinpoint my physical location, to unmask the shadow that dared to intrude upon his carefully orchestrated deception. My mind raced, calculating, analyzing. He was good, truly brilliant in his own twisted way, but I knew his tells. I knew the archaic tools he favored, the pathways he'd inevitably choose. He was an old dog, and old dogs, even brilliant ones, had predictable habits. I didn't run. I couldn't. Not when I was so close to exposing the truth, and not when I had just glimpsed the true architect of this financial devastation, Ambassador Cygnus Croft. The name had flashed on my screen for a mere second, tied to the shell corporations receiving the illicit funds, before Jorg's sloppy code had corrected itself. Cygnus Croft, a man whose public persona was one of unimpeachable integrity, a diplomat lauded for his philanthropic efforts, a titan of industry with deep ties to Washington. To implicate him would be to unleash a storm of unimaginable proportions. Vesper Kane and Alistair Finch were just ambitious, greedy opportunists. Croft was a viper, lurking in the deepest shadows, pulling strings I couldn't even begin to imagine. I had to play this perfectly. Jorg was tracing me through the decommissioned VPN gateway in upstate New York, a pathway he'd likely identified as an anomaly. His method would be to saturate the network with probes, triangulating my origin point based on latency and packet routing. It was an effective tactic, but slow. I had seconds, maybe a minute or two, before he narrowed his focus. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a symphony of precise, rapid-fire commands. I didn't try to hide, not entirely. Instead, I opened a dozen simultaneous, encrypted connections, scattering them across Ethelgard's most obscure, forgotten subnets. I rerouted data through old, publicly accessible proxy servers in Eastern Europe and South America, creating a digital smokescreen so thick it would choke Jorik's traceback attempts. It was digital misdirection, a conjurer's trick on a grand scale. He would be chasing phantoms while I moved. While his probe spun wildly, attempting to parse the cacophony of false signals, I initiated my true objective, the ghost logging system, the rural Pennsylvania data center. That was where the unvarnished truth resided, the raw data that Jorik was so desperately trying to sanitize. I exploited a known vulnerability in the diagnostic server cluster, a backdoor I had personally installed decades ago for emergency access, a failsafe that had been overlooked in Ethelgard's recent security audits. It was a single, elegant line of code designed to bypass authentication, assuming the user possessed a very specific, almost genetic understanding of the system's architecture. It was my digital skeleton key, the connection established. A rush of data flooded my screen. Encrypted, raw, unfiltered. This was it, the very heartbeat of Ethelgard's core systems, mirrored in real time, untainted by Jorik's efforts. But the moment I secured the connection, Jorik's probes, though still confused by my misdirection, focused their attention on the diagnostics cluster. He knew I was there. He knew I was after the logs. He sent a wave of denial-of-service packets, a frantic attempt to overwhelm the system and sever my connection. I was ready. I activated preconfigured script, a defensive maneuver I'd coded days ago, anticipating just such a move. It rerouted Jorik's attack through a series of internal load balancers, designed to absorb and dissipate network traffic. It bought me precious seconds. Simultaneously, I initiated the download. Gigabytes of encrypted log files began streaming into my secure laptop. It would take time, too much time if Jorik regained his focus. I needed a diversion, something more potent than just network noise. My eyes darted to my mental map of Ethelgard's network, the one I had meticulously rebuilt from memory. I saw it, a critical, yet often overlooked, administrative server cluster. It controlled the access permissions for a vast array of Ethelgard's internal applications, including Project Chimera's data feeds. If I could temporarily destabilize it, even for a few minutes, it would cause enough internal chaos to draw Jorik's attention, and likely Vesper's entire IT security team, away from me. It was risky, extremely risky. It could alert everyone to my presence. But the alternative was to lose the logs, to lose everything. With a grim determination, I launched my attack. Not a destructive one, but a surgical, disruptive one. I exploited a buffer overflow vulnerability in the old authentication module of the administrative cluster, forcing it into a recursive loop, effectively freezing its core functions without outright crashing it. The cascading error messages began immediately, lighting up my screen like a digital fireworks display. Bingo! Within seconds, Jorik's probes vanished from the ghost logging server. His frantic digital signature reappeared, focused entirely on the now failing administrative cluster. The internal alarms at Ethelgard must have been screaming. Their internal security teams would be in pandemonium, trying to understand how such a critical system could suddenly, inexplicably falter. While Jorik and Ethelgard's IT teams battled my digital phantom in the administrative cluster, the ghost logs continued to stream. The download completed. My fingers, trembling slightly from the adrenaline, initiated the final sequence, a complete wipe of my temporary presence within Ethelgard's network. Every packet, every connection, every trace of my intrusion was systematically erased, leaving behind only the chaotic aftershocks of my diversion. I was gone, a ghost once more. I disconnected my laptop from the network, the silence of my Bryn Mawr study suddenly enveloping me. Scout, who had been watching me intently, let out a soft whine, then settled his head back on my knee. Now came the true work, Lyra's key. I launched the ancient program. The screen filled with lines of esoteric code, a language from a forgotten era. It hummed to life, patiently ingesting the massive encrypted log file. The decryption process was agonizingly slow, each by the battle against time and encryption. My eyes, tired but resolute, watched the progress bar inch forward. As the first decrypted entries began to appear, a cold dread settled over me. It was worse than I had imagined. The logs painted a devastating picture. Vesper Kane's direct orders, emails and internal communication logs, explicitly directing expedited security audits and streamlined compliance checks for Project Chimera, overriding the warnings of senior security engineers. Her ambition was a sledgehammer, shattering every safeguard. Alastair Finch's complicity, board meeting minutes, investor call transcripts, and internal memos where Finch consistently downplayed Chimera's minor technical challenges, ensuring the stock price remained artificially inflated, even as the internal report screamed red. Project Chimera's flaws, thousands of error messages, data integrity warnings, and system instability alerts, all suppressed or reclassified as non-critical by Vesper's team. The integration of Synapse Innovations' AI was a disaster, actively corrupting Ethel Gard's financial ledgers. George Thorne's role, the most damning evidence. Detailed logs of his network activity, timestamps showing his systematic deletion and modification of crucial audit trails, directly correlating with the transactional disruptions reported by clients like Peregrine Capital. And then the smoking gun, the real-time logs of the automated fund transfers, rerouting multi-million-dollar transactions through Project Chimera's compromised systems, spearing them away to offshore shell corporations. And the beneficial owner of those shell corporations, confirmed by the decrypted metadata within the transfer logs, Ambassador Cygnus Croft. Croft wasn't just pulling strings. He would conduct an entire orchestra of fraud. Vesper and Alastair were his eager, greedy lieutenants, their disruptive innovation a clever cover for a systematic, multi-billion-dollar embezzlement scheme. George Thorne was their digital cleaner, tasked with burying the evidence. The full scope of their corruption was staggering. Ethelgard wasn't just being mismanaged. It was being systematically bled dry. My revenge had to be precise, devastating, and undeniable. I couldn't just leak this to the press. It would be dismissed as the bitter rantings of a former employee. I needed to ensure it landed with the force of an earthquake. I spent the next 2 days meticulously organizing the data. I cross-referenced the log entries, creating an irrefutable timeline of their crimes. I anonymized my own intrusion, ensuring no digital fingerprint could lead back to Theron Vance. I packaged the entire dossier into a series of encrypted files, layered with multiple password protections. Then I chose my targets, not just the media, but the SEC, the Department of Justice, and, crucially, a specific, highly respected investigative journalist known for her unwavering pursuit of corporate malfeasance, Alara Thorne. No relation to Jorek, but known for her tenacity. She had brought down titans before. I sent the encrypted package, along with a carefully crafted, anonymous letter, explaining the contents and the implications. I used a network of anonymous remailers and encrypted drop boxes, ensuring complete deniability. The letter was short, direct, and chilling, a roadmap to the destruction of Ethelgard's corrupt leadership and its shadowy puppet master. The world awoke to the news 2 weeks later. It started subtly, a cryptic report from Alara Thorne on a financial news outlet, hinting at unprecedented systemic vulnerabilities within Ethelgard dynamics and potential irregularities in recent financial reports. The stock market reacted with a nervous twitch. Then the dam broke. Alara Thorne's full expose hit the digital wires. She didn't just report. She presented the evidence. The ghost logs, decrypted and analyzed, laid bare for the world to see. Vesper Kane's emails, Alastair Finch's suppressed reports, George Thorne's frantic attempts to erase the truth, and the chilling, irrefutable proof of Ambassador Cygnus Croft's involvement in the multi-billion-dollar scheme. The narrative of disruptive innovation collapsed into a rubble of fraud and deceit. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Ethelgard Dynamics stock plummeted, wiping out billions in market value in a single day. Trading was halted. The SEC launched an emergency investigation. The Department of Justice opened a criminal probe. Vesper Kane, the ruthless architect of modernization, was arrested live on national television, being escorted out of Ethelgard's gleaming Market Street tower in handcuffs, her impeccably tailored suit now a symbol of her spectacular downfall. Her face, usually a mask of cold confidence, was pale and contorted with disbelief and terror. Alastair Finch, attempting to flee the country on a private jet, was apprehended at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. His corporate empire had crumbled, replaced by the grim reality of federal charges. Jorik Thorne, the digital janitor, proved more elusive. His network of anonymous connections and his deep understanding of digital obfuscation allowed him to vanish. But the evidence against him was undeniable. He was declared a fugitive, his brilliant mind now forever tainted by his complicity in fraud. A global manhunt began. I knew he wouldn't be able to stay hidden for long. His methods were old school, and the digital landscape had evolved. And then there was Cygnus Croft, the ambassador, the philanthropist, the man above reproach. The evidence was overwhelming. The shell corporations, the offshore accounts, the direct ties to the fraudulent transfers. His reputation, his career, his carefully constructed facade, shattered in an instant. Though his political connections initially shielded him from immediate arrest, the weight of public outrage and irrefutable evidence proved too great. He was stripped of his ambassadorship, his assets frozen, and soon news reports confirmed his indictment on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The architect of the grand scheme, the true viper, was finally exposed and cornered. From a quiet sanctuary in my Bryn Mawr home, I watched it all unfold. The news channels, the grim-faced analysts, the sensational headlines. Each report was a hammer blow, systematically dismantling the lives of those who had so carelessly dismantled mine. Scout, sensing my quiet intensity, lay curled at my feet, occasionally nudging my hand with his wet nose. He didn't understand the complex machinations of corporate fraud, but he understood the shift in my demeanor. The simmering rage that had fueled me for months had finally begun to recede, replaced by a quiet, almost unsettling calm. Vesper Kane's words, asterisk, the market values innovation, Theron, not sentimentality, asterisk, echoed in my mind. She was right, in a way. The market had valued her innovation, until that innovation was exposed as a vehicle for greed and deceit. And my sentimentality, my loyalty to the old ways, my deep institutional knowledge, had become the very weapon that brought her down. The revenge was complete. The villains were destroyed. But the chilling resolution settled over me like a winter fog. I was no longer Theron Vance, the discarded director of Enterprise Solutions. I was something else, a ghost who had walked among the living, manipulating the digital currents, a silent, unseen force. The man who had entered Vesper Kane's office that Tuesday morning, vulnerable and heartbroken, was gone. In his place was a different kind of man, one forged in the fires of betrayal, precise and ruthless, capable of orchestrating an empire's collapse from the quiet confines of his study. I looked at the framed photo of Lyra on my desk. Her smile, once a source of comfort, now seemed to hold a different meaning, a knowing acceptance of the path I had taken. I had done what I had to do. I had protected my legacy, avenged my dismissal, and exposed the corruption that threatened to consume the very company I had built. But at what cost to myself? The quiet life I once cherished, the comfortable rhythm, it was gone, irrevocably altered. The world had seen what I could do, and I had seen it too. The line between justice and vengeance had blurred, and I had crossed it, not with regret, but with a chilling certainty. The world had underestimated Theron Vance. And now they would remember the end.